The dog wouldn't move. That was the part nobody talked about afterward. Not in the reports, not in the news segment that ran for 40 seconds on a Thursday evening, not even in the paperwork that eventually cleared Mira Doyle's name. They talked about the medals. They talked about the investigation. They talked about the system failing her, which it had, spectacularly and without apology. But nobody mentioned that a 90-pound Belgian Malinois named Kodak had planted himself in front of a pawn shop counter and refused to budge for 11 minutes while his handler stood there, not quite knowing what to do. Mira would think about those 11 minutes for a long time. She had driven to Hendrick's Pawn and Exchange on a Tuesday morning in February, which was already a low point, because Tuesday mornings in February are when the world feels most indifferent to individual suffering. The sky over Clarksburg, West Virginia, was the color of old dishwater. The heater in her 2009 Civic worked only when it felt like it, which that morning it did not. She sat in the parking lot for 6 minutes before she could make herself get out of the car. She had her father's Army service uniform folded in a canvas bag on the back seat. She had his Bronze Star with Valor device, his Combat Infantryman badge, and the Purple Heart he had received after Fallujah in 2005 and never once displayed in the house, because he said displaying things like that was for people who needed other people to understand what they'd been through, and he'd made his peace with nobody understanding. His name had been Dennis Doyle. He had died 14 months ago of a cardiac event at age 61, and Mira had inherited exactly $400 in a savings account, a truck that needed a new transmission, and the canvas bag. She owed $200 in back rent. She owed $890 to a collections agency for an ER visit she'd had in October when she thought she was having a heart attack, but was actually having a panic attack, which turned out to be more expensive in the long run because at least a heart attack had dignity. She owed her friend Cassidy $300 that she had borrowed to cover groceries in December and had been meaning to pay back since. She had been a registered nurse at Appalachian Regional Medical Center for 4 years. She had worked cardiac telemetry, then ICU, then she had transferred to the float pool because the float pool paid a shift differential that had let her keep up with her rent until the month it didn't. She had taken on extra shifts. She had picked up agency work. She had eaten a lot of rice with a fried egg on top and told herself it was a lifestyle choice. Then in November, a patient had died on her watch. That was how administration put it in the formal review, on her watch. As if Mira had been standing at a window somewhere, looking out at the horizon, while Mr. Gerald Fitch, 67, post-bypass, had gone into VFib at 3:14 in the morning. As if she had not been the one who had run the code for 22 minutes. As if the crash cart had not been missing the amiodarone that should have been there, that she had flagged as missing in a supply chain report 6 weeks earlier, that someone in materials management had closed without action. The review board took 11 days. At the end of it, they issued a finding of deviation from standard of care and placed her license under a temporary practice restriction pending further investigation by the state nursing board. She was suspended without pay. She had savings to last 6 weeks. She stretched them to 9 by returning an air fryer she had bought herself for her birthday and never opened, selling her college textbooks to a used bookstore in Charleston for $40, and canceling everything that could be canceled. Streaming services, gym membership, the monthly donation to a dog rescue organization she had supported since nursing school. Canceling the dog rescue donation was the thing that made her cry, which surprised her because she had not cried about any of the rest of it. By the time she walked into Hendrick's Pawn and Exchange, she had $214 in her checking account and no prospect of income until the nursing board investigation concluded, which her attorney, a public interest lawyer named Mr. Kwan, who took her case pro bono and was visibly exhausted at all times, estimated could take another 4 to 6 months. The man behind the counter was named Lou. She did not know that at the time. She learned it later. He was in his late 50s, heavyset, with reading glasses pushed up on his head, and the resigned expression of someone who had spent decades watching people bring in objects they never intended to sell. Mira put the canvas bag on the counter and unzipped it slowly, like she was hoping the action would take longer than it did. She set out the Bronze Star first, then the Combat Infantryman badge, then the Purple Heart in its hinged case. Lou looked at them for a moment without touching them. "These yours?" he asked. My father's, she said. He passed last year. Lou nodded once. He didn't say he was sorry, which she appreciated more than she could explain. He just looked at the medals the way someone looks at something they understand is beyond its face value. I can do $340 for the lot, he said. The Purple Heart alone. He stopped. He stopped because the bell above the door had jingled and something had walked in that neither of them had quite registered yet as a dog. It moved with the contained, purposeful energy of something that had never in its life done anything by accident. Tan and black, compact and enormous at the same time, wearing a vest that said "Do Not Pet" in large letters. Behind it, on a 6-foot leash, was a man in his early 40s, wearing a gray Henley and cargo pants and an expression of polite bewilderment. Sergeant First Class Devin Colt, though Mira would not know his rank or his name for another 40 minutes. Sorry, he said, already pulling back on the leash. He does this sometimes when he. Kodak did not go back toward the door. Kodak went toward the counter. More specifically, Kodak went toward the Purple Heart in its hinged case, dropped his head, and pressed his nose to the velvet interior with the careful attention of a scholar examining a primary source document. Then he lay down. On the floor of Hendrick's Pawn and Exchange, directly in front of the counter, he lowered his entire body to the linoleum and put his chin on his front paws and looked up at Mira Doyle with an expression that she would later, in private, describe as recognition. Kodak, the man said. Not a command. More like a name you say when you're surprised. Kodak did not move. He's been out of service for 8 months, the man said. He was talking to the room more than to anyone in particular. Retired. Medical. He doesn't. He's not supposed to respond to things anymore like. He stopped. He looked at the medals on the counter. He looked at Mira. Are those my father's? She said for the second time in 3 minutes. It was getting easier to say and harder at the same time. The man looked at the Purple Heart. He looked at the bronze star with its small V device. He stood very still for a moment. What branch? He said. Army. 1st Infantry Division. He nodded slowly. What are you doing with them? It was a blunt question. It landed bluntly. But it wasn't unkind, and Mira was too tired for the kind of pride that would have let her deflect it. Selling them, she said. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at Kodak, who still had not moved from the floor. He looked at Mira again, this time the way people look when they are making a calculation that goes beyond math. Why? He said. Because I need to. Okay. He came to the counter, not beside her but at a respectful distance, and he looked at the 3 medals arranged on the glass. What do you need? She told him $200. She didn't know why she told him the number. She hadn't planned to. She told him about the back rent and the ER bill and the friend she owed $300, and she told him about the nursing board and about Gerald Fitch, and about the amiodarone that hadn't been in the crash cart, and about the supply chain report she had filed 6 weeks before that, and the flag she had raised, and the way the flag had been lowered by someone in materials management who she later learned was also the brother-in-law of the director of nursing operations. She told him all of that standing at a counter in a pawn shop in Clarksburg, West Virginia, at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning in February, and when she finished, she felt hollow in the way you only feel when you have been carrying something for a very long time and have finally just set it down somewhere, even if only for a minute. The man was quiet for a moment. That report, he said, the one you filed about the crash cart. You have a copy? In my car. Something shifted in his face. Can I see it? His name was Devin Colt. He had been a Special Forces medic for 16 years before a training accident took most of the mobility in his left knee and ended his active service. He lived in Clarksburg now, had for 2 years, was vague about why in the way people are vague when the answer is something like, "This is where I ended up when I stopped moving." He worked 3 days a week as an EMS instructor at the community college. He volunteered with a veterans resource organization that helped people navigate VA benefits claims, which was, he said, a full-contact sport that required approximately the same amount of persistence as a year-long deployment and produced a similar level of existential fatigue. He walked her to her car. Kodak walked between them, still wearing the vest, still moving with that precise and intentional energy. Mira retrieved the folder she kept in her glove compartment, the one she had compiled over 3 months, not because she had known she would need it, but because she was the kind of person who kept folders. Incident reports, her original supply chain notification, 2 follow-up emails. A screenshot of the closed ticket in the materials management system with the timestamp and the initials of the person who had closed it. Devin looked at the folder for a long time. He stood by her car in the parking lot with the dishwater sky overhead, and he read each page the way people read things when they are looking for something specific. This initial report, he said. Did you file it through the hospital's internal system or through the state? Internal, she said. I didn't know I could go to the state directly. You can. He turned a page. Do you know a woman named Patricia Wouldn? No. She's a compliance investigator with the West Virginia Office of Health Facility Licensure and Certification. She used to be a travel nurse. She's been going after ARMC for 18 months on a completely different issue. Staffing sees this. He stopped. Can I make copies of these? I have digital copies, Mira said. I can email them. He handed her his phone so she could type in her address. His contact name for himself was just Colt, which she noticed and did not comment on. She sent him the files in the parking lot. He confirmed receipt, and then he put his phone away and looked at her with the directness of someone who had spent years in environments where vague language got people killed. I want to be honest with you, he said. I don't know if this helps. The nursing board investigation is a separate process from any licensure or compliance action against the hospital. Your license could still be restricted, even if everything you're telling me checks out. I'm not an attorney. I have an attorney, she said. Good. Tell him about the materials management ticket. The timestamp and the initials are specific. That's the part that matters. Mira looked at him. Why are you doing this? He seemed to genuinely consider the question. Kodak picked you, he said. He doesn't do that for no reason. He looked down at the dog, who was sitting between them with the patience of a diplomat waiting for a meeting to begin. Also, what you're describing, a flag that got buried by someone related to an administrator. I've seen that before. I've been that person. The one who filed the flag. He looked back at her. Didn't end well for me, either, for a while. She didn't ask what had eventually ended well. Something in his posture suggested the story was longer than a parking lot. What do I do right now? She said. Right now you go home and you don't sell those medals. She looked back toward the pawn shop. Lou was visible through the window, rearranging something in a display case with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had nowhere to be. I need the money, she said. I know, he said it simply, without embarrassment. I can loan you enough to get through the next 6 weeks. You can pay it back when you're reinstated. You don't know me. Kodak does. It took 3 weeks for Patricia Wouldn to request the materials management records from Appalachian Regional Medical Center. It took her another 9 days to find what she was looking for, which was not just the closed ticket on Mira's supply chain report, but 4 other closed tickets on similar reports filed by 2 other nurses in the preceding 18 months, all of which bore the same initials in the resolution field. The initials belonged to a man named Garrett Fleming, not a name that appeared in any org chart, because Garrett Fleming was not an employee of ARMC in any official capacity. He was a contractor in the supply chain management firm that held ARMC's logistics outsourcing contract. He was also, as Devin had suspected and as Wouldn confirmed through a 20-minute search of public business records, the brother-in-law of ARMC's director of nursing operations, a woman named Sandra Pruett. This was, Patricia Wouldn told Mira's attorney Mr. Kwan in a phone call that Mr. Kwan described as the most animated I've heard anyone be about procurement documentation, a significant problem for the hospital. The nursing board investigation did not stop. That was important to understand, Mira's attorney told her. The board operated independently, but 2 things happened that materially changed its trajectory. The first was that the board received a formal notice from the Office of Health Facility Licensure that ARMC was under review for systemic equipment maintenance failures, which gave the board's investigators a different framework for understanding the context of the Gerald Fitch Code. The second was that a nurse named Yvonne Brackett, who had worked at ARMC's ICU for 11 years and had never filed a formal complaint about anything, submitted a voluntary statement to the board describing 3 separate instances in the prior 2 years where crash cart equipment had been incomplete or expired. Yvonne Brackett's statement came 4 days after she and Mira had coffee at a diner on Route 50. Mira had not asked her for the statement. She had just told her what was happening. Yvonne had listened and then said very quietly that she had been meaning to say something for a while. That was the thing about truth, Mira thought. It didn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrived in a diner booth over bad coffee and a shared order of hash browns, and it looked exactly like someone who had been waiting a long time for someone else to go first. The practice restriction on Mira's license was lifted on a Wednesday morning in April, 87 days after it had been imposed. She was sitting in Mr. Kwan's office when he read her the board's letter, and she had the strange experience of feeling nothing for about 10 seconds and then feeling everything at once, which was not how she had expected vindication to feel, but was, she supposed, exactly how relief felt when it had been deferred long enough. She called her mother first. She called Cassidy second and told her about the $300. She sat in her car in the parking lot of Mr. Kwan's building, and she let herself cry for a few minutes, properly and without apology, which she had not really allowed herself to do since November. Then she texted Devin Colt. Board letter came. Restriction lifted. He responded 11 minutes later with "knew it." Then, a few seconds after, Kodak sends his regards. She laughed out loud in the car, alone, at 10:40 in the morning. It felt like something coming back online. The hospital did not apologize. That was the part that stuck with her in the weeks that followed, even as the rest of it began to resolve. Sandra Pruitt was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the compliance review. The logistics contract with Fleming's firm was suspended. 3 of the supply chain management tickets were formally reopened and addressed. But from ARMC itself, from the building, the institution, the letterhead, there was no word that acknowledged what had happened to Mira Doyle, what it had cost her, what it had required of her just to survive the 9 months in which she had been presumed guilty of something she had tried to prevent. She did not go back to ARMC. She had not expected to want to. She found a position at a smaller hospital in Morgantown, 38 miles north, cardiac step-down, day shift, with a nurse manager named Terry, who had been an RN for 23 years and greeted Mira on her first day by saying, "I read your case. You did the right thing. Welcome aboard." It was the first time anyone in a professional context had said those words to her, and she had to look away for a moment before she could respond. She paid Devin back in 3 installments over 4 months. He accepted each Venmo transfer with no comment except a thumbs-up emoji, which she found oddly fitting for a person of few words. She went back to Hendrick's Pawn and Exchange on a Thursday afternoon in late May. Lou was behind the counter in the same spot with the same reading glasses pushed up on his head. He recognized her immediately. "You didn't sell them," he said. "It wasn't a question." "No," she said. "I didn't." He nodded once with the satisfaction of a man whose faith in something had been confirmed. She thanked him, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking him for. Maybe just for the 6 minutes she had sat in his parking lot working up the courage to come inside. Maybe for the way he had looked at her father's medals without touching them. Maybe for the fact that his bell above the door had jingled at exactly the right moment on exactly the right Tuesday morning. She kept the medals in the canvas bag for another month after that, on the shelf in her closet. Then, one afternoon, she took out the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star and the Combat Infantryman badge, and she arranged them in a shadow box she bought at a craft store for $18.99 and she hung the shadow box on the wall above her desk. Her father, she thought, would have objected to that on principle. But her father also had not been around to watch what the last 9 months had required of her, and she thought, she hoped that if he had been, he might have understood why she needed something on the wall that said, "This is what it costs, and it was worth it, and you came through." Kodak, the last she heard, had taken to sleeping in Devin's kitchen in a beam of afternoon light that came through the window between noon and 2, which Devin described as the most aggressive retirement I've ever witnessed. He was, by all accounts, completely unbothered by the human world and its complications. He had done what he came to do.